Well, good evening. Just while we're waiting for people to find us, I'm afraid I had to stop and start. Perhaps you'd just like to say hello in the comments, and maybe just say where you're from. And just while I try and share the post, get a few more bods with us to find us. Oh, hi, Martin. Oh, in Clapham. Oh. Good evening and welcome. I say, just as we're waiting for others to find us and join us, please do say hi in the comments, and perhaps say where you're viewing from. Saw Sarah Jane there before. Shemai Cariad. Ti'n iawn? Hi, Nettie. So Sarah Jane, I assume you're in Wales. Hi, Jay. Welcome. Excellent. Where are you, Jay? Father Raphael has joined us all the way from Houston in Texas. Good evening, Father. Welcome. Somebody from Macedonia, welcome. Quite an international gathering. There you are. Well, welcome everyone to Ask a Bishop Live. Some of you may be familiar with this format. The idea is that, although I've changed it slightly, just to give myself a chance. So that I shall elect a topic, or perhaps you guys will elect a topic the day before, and under that general topic I will answer questions as best I may. So I thought it made sense for this episode to kind of recap and finish the talks that I've given the last 4 days concerning participation in online worship, how to do it, why to do it, and what the benefits of it are. So we may just check people's appreciation or understanding of that during this broadcast. So now the nature of Ask a Bishop Live, obviously then, is that I will answer questions put by you in the comments. As I say, each episode will be a topic, and tonight's topic is about online worship and about spiritual communion. So for those of you who are just joining us, in Cheddar, Jay, right, thank you. We're just like kind of introducing ourselves, as it were, just saying where we're from. So it's quite interesting to know where everyone's from, because it's such a wide group, international even, of people that watch these broadcasts, and it's quite interesting for me to know. So who am I? Because obviously some of you may not know who I am, but I'm Archbishop Jerome Lloyd, the titular Archbishop of Selsey and Metropolitan of Europe for Old Romans. Old Romans are Catholics, Latin Rite Catholics, who could not accept the papal dogmas introduced in the 19th century and were received into Orthodoxy at the turn of the 20th century. Sometimes known as Western Orthodox, but that's who I am and what I'm about, where I'm from, as it were, and that's the kind of position and authority that I'll be speaking with or speaking from. So press the like button if you watched any of the talks the last 4 days, starting from Wednesday evening. How many of you have been watching these broadcasts since Wednesday? Just press the like button. See, this is live and interactive. I'll just press the like button for you to demonstrate. There you go. Did you see that? There we are. So, oh, good. Yes. So somebody found the button. Excellent. One more. Super. So a couple of you at least, a few more, have been watching the last few evenings' broadcasts. So we were discussing online worship. So what is the benefit? I mean, what is the point of worshipping online? Well, of course, we all understand the current situation in this country, in the UK, is effectively a lockdown. It's not technically a lockdown, but effectively it is. So Christians, of course, as with everybody else in the population, are being advised to stay indoors as much as possible. And churches are officially closed to the public. Now, there is a caveat for those of you who've noticed that I'm still broadcasting the daily mass from our chapel here in Brighton. Ministers of religion are permitted to go to their churches to broadcast or to offer privately worship on behalf of their people. So, of course, I've naturally been doing that. Other clergy have been broadcasting from home chapels, some of them hastily arranged, but nonetheless looking very good. And so there's become a proliferation, as it were, of options for people to worship online. So it's answering a need. And what is that need? It's really for us as a Christian. You see, as a Christian, our faith is about community. It's about communion, and it's about fellowship. And so being able to worship with other Christians online expresses and manifests and fulfills, to some extent, that need and that desire and that aspect of communion and fellowship that is really so integral to our faith as Christians. You know the phrase "no man is an island," or to put it in the PC way, no person is an island. Or as the Bible says from Genesis, it is not good for man to be alone. And that's with the Christian faith. The Christian faith is all about God's love. It's all about God's charity, about his divine, selfless, sacrificial love for us. And us, in turn, then sharing and manifesting that sacrificial love with others. And so in order to do that, you can't do that if you're on your own. You're probably familiar with the summary of the law, the two great commandments as Jesus put them. The first, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And the second, to love your neighbour. And so the Christian life, the Christian faith and religion is about really those two commandments and making those two commandments a reality. And so while on the one hand, of course, the first and most important commandment is to give God the love and honour and adoration that he deserves as our Heavenly Father, as our Creator, as the author of all life, of our being, who purposes us into existence. That is one part, but the other part, of course, requires us to share the love that we have received from God in turn. So that's why communion, why communal fellowship, why worshipping together is fundamentally so important to our faith as Christians. So this ability to be able to worship online at the present time, of course, is a great boon and a great comfort to many people, enabling us to some extent to realise and experience that fundamental aspect of our incarnational faith as Christians. Remembering that the Christian faith is not all about God up here and us down here, but is about the reconciliation of the two, about the bringing together in harmony spirit and flesh. So our communion, our fellowship with regard to our worship as Christians expresses communion with God, communion with the divine, communion with the heavenly, but at the same time experienced and shared communally and with others. So just to give an indication that all made sense, if anyone who's left watching, just press the like button for me if they would. Again, I'll demonstrate. If you don't press the like button, I will assume that you didn't understand, and then I will try and explain it again. So if you did, thank you. So I'm trying to, I want this to be as interactive as we can make it, as is sort of possible, or as we are able. So good, okay, so that made some sense. Now the other aspect, of course, to worship. So worship is then, of course, us expressing love for God. And then the most important form of worship that the church on earth can offer is, of course, the Mass, is the holy sacrifice of the Mass, primarily because it is the ultimate expression of communion and fellowship. It is the ultimate worship to God that can be offered, and it can only be offered in union with Christ. The Mass, essentially, the full title of the Mass is the sacrifice of the Mass, and it is referring specifically to the sacrifice of Christ on Calvary, which was him offering himself as a spotless oblation, a spotless victim, as an expression of sacrificial love from us toward God and of God toward us. And that's why the Mass and the Divine Liturgy is so important to us as Orthodox Catholics. Essentially, in the Mass, we are uniting ourselves, our worship, with that single act of supreme and sublime sacrificial love toward God that Jesus offered on the cross for our redemption and for our salvation. And that's why during the previous talks I've been talking about preparing ourselves for worship, intending to because if we're going to if the intention is to unite ourselves with that supreme and sublime act of sacrificial offering by Christ, then we ought ourselves, as it were, as best we can, to strive to match that offering. Now, of course, we can't be as pure as Christ was, but we can certainly do our level best to unite ourselves with his spotless act of sacrificial worship. So the intention that we have in participating with Mass online is then to manifest that intention to unite ourselves with that sacrifice of the cross on Calvary, with that spotless, pure offering of sacrificial love toward God by Christ, seeking ourselves to unite ourselves, identify ourselves with that act of supreme worship. Now, ordinarily, of course, we would expect these days to receive Holy Communion at Mass. And of course, that's not possible now, physically, except for the priest who is offering the Mass online. But obviously, those who are watching, it's not possible for them. And so there has been a great resurgence, and thank God for it, a great resurgence in spiritual communion. Suddenly everybody's talking about spiritual communion. Again, if everyone could press the like button if spiritual communion is something you're familiar with. Just give me an indication just by pressing the like button. Anyone? There's one. Thank you, Sam. So, rather than continue and give an explanation then as to what spiritual communion is, perhaps someone in the comments would like to ask about spiritual communion. So I noticed that two of you, as it were, raised your hand with the like button to say that you were familiar with it. Is there anyone watching who's unfamiliar with the concept of spiritual communion? Perhaps you could raise your hand by pressing the like button. That's the thumbs up icon at the bottom of the screen. Okay, right. Well, then I'll assume that, if everyone's suggesting that they all understand what spiritual communion is, then I suppose we could call it all a day here now then. No. Let's ask a question again. So with regard to spiritual communion, How many of you have an understanding that there is a need to prepare oneself for spiritual communion? Perhaps you could indicate by, as I demonstrate here, pressing the like button. So I'll just put the question again. Okay. So the two who know about spiritual communion have just indicated that they understand the need for preparation for spiritual communion. And for those of you who are silent and think that I can't see you, I will explain to you why then there is a need to prepare ourselves for spiritual communion. Essentially because spiritual communion is just as important as receiving communion, because the two intend really the same effect, which is of course to be united with Jesus, is to be united with God. Those of you who have heard me preach about the nature of the Eucharist and Holy Communion will understand, of course, when I say that we realize in that moment, as the host is put upon our tongue, we realize in that moment literally Christ's high priestly prayer as detailed to us in St. John's Gospel, his prayer that we may be one in him as he is one in the Father, and that we may be all in one together. Now, with what Orthodox Catholics believe about the Eucharist, that all makes sense, because for us, of course, the bread and wine have transubstantiated into the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ. Christ is God and man. Thus, when we receive the Holy Eucharist, he literally becomes one with us as the host is placed upon our tongue. We spiritually become one with him, and we are physically united with him. And by extension then, because Jesus is one person of the Blessed Trinity, and none of the persons of the Blessed Trinity are ever separate from each other, bound together in unity as they are by charity, so then we are one in God at that moment. And also it means, by extension of course, again, that the receipt of Holy Communion is real communion with God and everyone connected with God. So that we realize that in that moment of Holy Communion, of receiving the Eucharist, we are in communion at that moment, yes, with Jesus, yes, with God, and yes, with the Holy Spirit, and indeed with the whole kingdom of God, with the whole communion of saints. So with the Church triumphant in heaven, the Church expectant on its way to heaven, and we, the Church militant on earth, hoping for heaven. All of us bound, united in and with and through God in Christ. When we individually receive the Eucharist, we experience that magnitude of communion. Now, spiritual communion, of course, then is essentially in some ways the same thing, but of course it's not as manifest. It's not as easily obvious because we haven't got the host, because we're not physically receiving the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ, because God is not literally becoming one with us upon our tongue in a physical and tangible as well as a spiritual way. Then what is required for spiritual communion is an even deeper understanding and desire for that union with God that is the benefit of communion. So you will notice, perhaps you've noticed that with the prayers offered for acts of spiritual communion, reference is always made to the Eucharist. recognizing that there is a difference. There is a difference between receiving Holy Communion and making an act of spiritual communion. But one of the one way to appreciate spiritual communion is to recognize the onus becomes on us to manifest the intention and the desire to receive that which God is always, by invitation, extending and making available to us, to be one with him. Essentially, spiritual communion is to intend and to realize in the present moment what we hope for as Christians. In fact, what the point of our life as Christians is for. Thank you, Father Sam. God bless you. Because the purpose of our Christian lives, of course, is to be one with God. Holy Communion makes that, as it were, an objective reality for us. Spiritual communion requires us to, within ourselves, deeply intend to realize that desire for union, which is and can be ultimately achieved by one who, after the example of various saints, strives with every ounce of their being, with every breath that they take, to be one with God through Christ. Now, of course, we understand that the other sacraments of the Church are afforded to us in order to give us again tangible and assured means by which we receive God's grace that enables us to, as it were, receive the strength and the power necessary to overcome ourselves to become one with God. But otherwise, as we all know in our Christian lives, it all does come. It is difficult for us to realize by ourselves, to keep on the straight and narrow, to keep focused. We need God's grace in order to do it. But God's grace is readily available to us if only we will allow ourselves to be open and to receive it. And spiritual communion, as it were, is the manifestation of that desire. It's our desire as Christians to realize communion with God, to be one with him. We can only be one with him through Christ. We can only be one with him through Christ's atoning sacrifice. And we are made one with Christ by virtue of our baptism. So that's why then we ought to prepare ourselves for spiritual communion, that we ought to strive to manifest within ourselves that true and sincere intention, and really and purposefully desire it. After all, it is about uniting our love with God's love, our love for God and for each other with God's love for us all, both individually and severally. And so our motivation for spiritual communion has to be one of love. And that's really quite a difficult thing to achieve, you know. When we receive Holy Communion, it's kind of a given. What that desire is kind of a given, and it's kind of achieved for us by the sacrament, by the reception of the sacrament. We objectively at that moment become one with God and he with us. But for spiritual communion, it does require, as it were, an extra effort on our part to truly realize spiritual communion. Now, there are various saints through the centuries, the most recent, of course, being Padre Pio, Saint Pio of Pietrelcina, who prayed for spiritual communion all the time. He wasn't doing anything else, because he understood and recognized that spiritual communion is the desire to be one with God through Jesus at all times, to realize the purpose of our existence. And he knew that that could only be achieved through and with and by God's grace. So he pursued holiness with great zeal and fervour, and of course everyone came to recognize and see that in him, and of course to still recognize that about him. But what Padre Pio was doing, what he was desiring, what he was intending, is what all of us as Christians should be striving for. All of us should be striving to manifest that level of commitment to holiness that we see in the lives of people like Padre Pio and other saints. Now, people often say, oh, well, yeah, but they were a saint, so, I'm no saint. Well, they weren't a saint either until they died. I know we have this phrase, a living saint, but really, technically, we're all living saints, in the sense that all of us are striving to be saints, I hope. That is the point of being a Christian, is striving to be a saint, is striving to be holy. So don't, as it were, try to let yourself off the hook by saying, oh, well, I'm not like Padre Pio, or I'm not like Mother Teresa, or I'm no saint like they are. That's completely the wrong attitude to have. The point is that they were just like us. They were just ordinary people, ordinary flesh and blood. Likewise, they had their temptations, they had their trials and tribulations, they had their testings of faith, etc. But they persevered, they remained steadfast, they remained loyal. And eventually, of course, that meant that they were able to achieve extraordinary things by God's grace. And they did so because they were perpetually intending all the time, striving to realize that communion with God through Jesus. So for those who think, and as I think sometimes people do, they think, oh, spiritual communion is kind of a poor substitute, or spiritual communion is something we do when we can't get the real thing. Quite the opposite. Spiritual communion is the manifestation of the desire and the intention to realize true communion with God through Jesus in the present moment. And the only difference, as I say, between spiritual communion and Holy Communion is that through Holy Communion we objectively realize union with God through the sacrament, through the reception of the sacrament. With spiritual communion we have to work harder at manifesting our own desire and intention to realize for us that which God is continually extending to us through his love for us and through his grace that he is freely outpouring toward us. We have only to open our hearts and minds and collaborate, cooperate with that love and with that grace. And then we may realize, as some saints have in this lifetime, we may realize that true union with God, that closeness with God. So spiritual communion then is certainly a worthwhile thing to desire, but it takes considerable effort. Certainly, we should approach it with more effort than perhaps people might think is necessary, just by reciting a prayer, the act of spiritual communion, during the online broadcast. No, it requires more than that. And as I've said in these in the talks the previous evenings about online worship, we must approach online worship with just the same way as we would prepare ourselves to be present at Mass physically in the same place as Mass is going on, to unite ourselves with that supreme and sublime offering, that ultimate offering of love for God, uniting ourselves with Christ's atoning sacrifice. In many ways, online worship is harder, it's more difficult. For all the obvious reasons, but also to achieve, to realize for oneself the full benefit of it requires a great deal of effort on our own part. And it's certainly foolish for anyone to think that just by reciting a prayer that means they have achieved spiritual communion. We have to intend, we have to have the intention, we have to prepare ourselves, we have to have the true desire to experience union with God. And as I say, spiritual communion is only then to express that which is the purpose of our lives as Christians. And that's why people like Padre Pio would pray any spare moment he had and make an act of spiritual communion, because he genuinely desired to be one with God at all times and in all places, and not to exist without God. He wanted the comfort and consolation of always knowing that he was united with God through Jesus. That is the ultimate benefit, of course, of what Jesus gains for us in his supreme act of self-sacrificial love on the cross. And of course we are able to receive all this and to experience all this because of his resurrection. So that's what spiritual communion is all about. So perhaps you could just show express by a show of hands your understanding of what I've just said. So if you understood all of that, please press the thumbs up emoticon, there it is, and just let me know that made sense to you. So all those for whom it made sense, if you can just press the like button. And fair warning, because if nobody pressed it, thank you, because if you don't press it, I'll give it all again. Okay, so let's rephrase the question. If you didn't understand what I was talking about, then again, a show of hands using the thumbs up emoticon. Okay, well, as silence betokens consent, I shall leave things there. That's our time. So, as I say, every evening, 6:15, there may even be an early lunchtime edition as well, because I'm conscious of the fact that some of our faithful in other places of the world, this time of day is no good for them, because some of them are in bed. But this Ask a Bishop Live will be at 6:15 every evening, and please feel free to interact. Put questions in the comments, and I will certainly at various points invite you to interact, so that we can make this a less dry experience, as it were, than just me talking to camera. So bless you all for being here this evening. Good to see some of you. Good to assume that you're well and that you're healthy. Be assured of my prayers for us all in these difficult times. Mass, of course, will be broadcast tomorrow as usual at 8:30. The Angelus at 12. And again at 6, and then 6:15 Ask a Bishop Live tomorrow. And I shall try to notify in advance what our topic tomorrow will be. So bless you all. Thank you for watching, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. Stay safe, wash your hands, stay away from each other. God bless.